I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com with a guest we haven't had on in a long time. You see his work all over the internet. He's featured on sites all over the place, including InfoWars. But his site is the Economic Collapse blog. He has other sites as well. I'm talking about Michael Snyder. Michael Snyder, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
It's great to be back with you, Greg.
A little introduction, a little further introduction. You were a K Street lawyer, a lobbyist, basically, in Washington, D.C. So you have a law degree, and you were a practicing lawyer, and now you're putting together these wonderful stories all over the internet. And, according to a short article you put on your own site, you had a small start, and now your site's pretty big. And your work's featured all over the internet. You're having a big impact on warning people about the real economy that is not so good. Even though the president says if you're saying that this economy is bad, you're, quote, peddling fiction, unquote. And I want to talk about your first article about the oil downturn. A lot of people want to know more about this. That everybody just says, wow, gas is $1, 25 or 40 or 50 a gallon, and boy, isn't this great? And not so much if you're living in several states in America.
Oh, absolutely, Greg. Like most people, I like to go to the gas station, fill up my gas tank very, very cheaply. And a lot of people think, oh, this is good. I'm saving money. It's good for the consumer. But on the other end, it's not so great for the economy or the financial system. If you go back to 2014, so over the past 18 months, the price of oil has fallen close to 75%. By about 3/4. In fact, today, as we do this interview, the price of oil is down about 5%. It had gone slightly back up. Now it's dropping again. And what's happening? We've got this massive glut of oil all over the world, and now sanctions against Iran have been dropped, and they're flooding the world with oil. And so we've got all this oil. And meanwhile, economic activity around the world is slowing down, so there's not so much of a demand for oil. So the price of oil has crashed, and this is having a dramatic impact. Yeah, people can fill up their gas tanks more cheaply, but Americans are losing their jobs. In fact, since the last recession, the primary engine for the growth of good jobs in this country has been the oil industry. But now that's completely reversing. In fact, in 2015, more than 130,000 good-paying energy jobs went away, got lost in the United States. So people are losing good-paying jobs, and in order to have a middle class, we need good-paying jobs. But in addition, the companies that are laying those people off are getting into trouble. Last year alone, in 2015, 67 U.S. oil and gas companies went bankrupt. And now it's being projected, CNBC was reporting this the other day, that 35% of all the oil and gas companies that remain on the entire planet are in danger of imminent bankruptcy. And so this is a huge deal. Energy companies account for somewhere between 15 and 20% of the junk bond market. We've seen junk bonds crashing. But then a lot of these big banks, they had backed the energy industry with loans, with financial arrangements. And so, just on CNBC this morning, there was a big headline about how J.P. Morgan Chase said, yeah, we'd set aside money for these losses before. We've got to set aside even more money. They're bracing for big losses. Over in Europe, their banks are even more exposed to energy losses, huge problems. You look at the biggest bank in Germany, Deutsche Bank, which is the biggest and most important economy in Europe. Their stock has been absolutely crashing. Just earlier this month, their stock actually crashed lower than it was at any point during the last great financial crisis. So, we're starting to see problems with the too big to fail banks, not only in the United States, but over in Europe, other financial institutions. So this is rippling through the entire system. And what we've seen so far is just the beginning. If the price of oil stays where it is, it doesn't even have to go down anymore, which it could very easily do. If it just stays where it is, over time, the results are just going to become even more catastrophic, Greg.
Do you think this is the black swan, the problem nobody saw coming? The banks a couple of years ago thought, wow, we'll invest in energy. What could go wrong? I mean, it's a sure deal. Oil's going to be $100 a barrel from now until forever, right? And, of course, no, wrong. And could this be the calamity that could take us, you're talking, your blog is the Economic Collapse blog. Could this be the thing that brings us into an economic collapse with the big banks?
Well, I think there's quite a number of things, and I think we're going to talk about some more of them as we move forward. But I think we're moving into a perfect storm in terms of economically. Another thing I'm looking at, Greg, is global trade, how it's absolutely imploding. In fact, Bloomberg recently ran a story in which they said global trade, global economic, and this is real economic activity, the stuff that's being bought and sold and shipped all over the planet. That's the real economy, unlike the financial markets. But Bloomberg ran this story, and they said it's now cheaper to rent a 1,100-foot shipping vessel, merchant vessel, the kind that go across the ocean, than it is to rent a Ferrari. You know, now when you add in fuel costs and everything else, it's still more expensive to operate the shipping vessel. But in terms of just the rental fee, the shipping vessel is now less expensive than it is to rent a Ferrari, which is absolutely insane. We've seen the Baltic Dry Index drop just here in recent weeks, drop below 300 for the first time ever. We didn't even see that during the last Great Recession and financial crisis. So I didn't even know the Baltic Dry Index could go that low. We're seeing exports decline dramatically in South Korea. New numbers for Japan came out. They have been desperately trying to, play games with our currency, get their exports going again. Their exports in January were down 12% year over year, I believe. Exports in China have been falling month after month after month. While they account for more global trade than anyone else in the world. U.S. exports were down 7%, the last monthly figure we have. India, their exports are down. This is happening all over the world. Real economic activity is grinding to a halt. You go out to places like Colorado, and you can find just hundreds of trains just sitting, hundreds of train engines just sitting on the tracks, nothing to do, nowhere to go, because rail traffic is slowing down so dramatically. Rail companies throughout the United States are reporting, less revenue, less activity. Demand for Class 8 trucks, I believe in January, was down 48% year over year. So just, all these measures of real economic activity are just imploding.
And with the oil patch, you add that on to the banks, add that on to everything else where they made these big bets on fracking and natural gas and oil drilling and the price of oil being at least $70 or $80 a barrel. And could that bring the banks under and soon?
Well, it's certainly putting a lot of stress on them. Now, a lot of times what happens, like with Lehman Brothers in 2008, there was a lot of trouble brewing under the surface, and we didn't know about it until it was too late. Then all of a sudden, Lehman Brothers collapsed, but they had been collapsing over a period of time. But a lot of times these big banks don't want to come out and admit trouble ahead of time, but the problem of too big to fail, last time around 2008, we saw what happened, and then our politicians said, we're going to fix this. Did they fix it? Of course not. In fact, since that time, the too big to fail banks here in the United States have collectively gotten 40% larger. Meanwhile, 1,400 smaller banks have totally gone out of existence. So the problem of too big to fail is now bigger than ever. Now we're getting hints of this because these big banks are laying workers off, just like Lehman Brothers did in 2008. We're seeing, the big banks like Deutsche Bank announced a $7 billion loss for last year. Absolutely extraordinary. The biggest bank in Switzerland did a similar thing. And then we see, like we see today with JP Morgan Chase saying, the losses are going to be bigger than we anticipated from the energy sector. We're setting more money aside. All these things are clues that, and signs that we look for when the big banks are starting to get into very serious trouble.
Do you think Deutsche Bank? I mean, you're talking about how it's, and that's one of my canaries in the coal mine of banks, is that I had another guest on saying their stock is below where it was, 50% below where it was before, back to where it was back in 2008. We're supposed to have a great economy. Do you think Deutsche Bank, with its derivatives, their book of derivatives is something like 70 trillion plus in derivatives, in a German economy of 3.8 trillion? It's 20 times, 18 times. It's an unbelievable amount of leverage on one bank in one country, even though it's Germany, the engine of Europe. But could Deutsche Bank lead off the parade of falling dominoes of banks?
Oh, it absolutely could. The collapse of Deutsche Bank would be a far bigger event than the collapse of Lehman Brothers back in 2008. So if you're looking for another Lehman Brothers moment, all the things you just talked about, their derivatives exposure, And they're really at the core of the Eurozone, because you look at Greece and the problems there. They're the 44th largest economy in the world, and Europe had such a problem trying to rescue them. They're still a mess. Greek stocks have still been plunging this year. They're a total disaster zone. You look at what's happening in Italy now. Italy is the 8th largest economy on the entire planet. Their banks, since the beginning of the year, have their bank stocks have been imploding. They're saying basically all of the biggest banks in Italy are going to have to be bailed out because they're drowning in what are called NPLs, non-performing loans. But in essence, loans they shouldn't have made that have gone bad. And so the entire Italian banking system, the banking system of the 8th largest economy in the planet, is imploding. But everyone thought, well, Germany's the core. Germany's strong. Germany is the pillar, is the rock. The rest of the Eurozone can depend on. But now the biggest bank in the most important and biggest economy in Europe is in the process of coming apart. Now, and I wrote about this back in September. I said, look for problems at Deutsche Bank. And now it's coming to pass, to fruition. They're losing tremendous amount of money, as we saw with the $7 billion they just reported for last year. They're in all kinds of chaos. They're laying off workers. The cost to insure their credit default swaps are going through the roof. So watch Deutsche Bank. I think that's potentially a major trigger over there in Europe.
Do you think it all comes apart this year? I mean, by all the data that you put up on the economic collapse blog, I mean, just one thing after another, verifiable, real data, not peddling fiction. Do you think it could come apart this year?
Well, Greg,
or is it coming apart this year, right now?
Yeah, I believe it's already in the process of coming apart. Since mid-2015, just a couple weeks ago, CNBC all of a sudden said, global stocks in a bear market for the first time since the last financial crisis. Well, a bear market, for those that don't know, means that the stocks have fallen globally about 20%. That means 1/5 of all global stock market wealth has already gone. We only had 4/5 left at that point. And so at one point earlier this month, a total of $16.5 trillion had been wiped out from global stock markets since mid-2015. So this started last year. We saw oil collapse. We've seen junk bonds collapse. We've seen commodity prices collapse. And the $16.5 trillion I just mentioned is just for stocks. We've also, when you add up the others, that's trillions more wealth that's been wiped out all over the world. And so, what we've seen already has been extraordinary, but we're still in the process. People want to think of an event like a single day or a week or a month. This is a process. It started in the middle of last year. An incredible amount of damage has already been done. And now, I believe we're just in the early chapters of something that's going to take an extended amount of time to play out. Now, of course, there are certain events which could come along which could greatly accelerate things.
Such as war in the Middle East, as you wrote about. This could be the very first nuclear war that's coming in the Middle East. I mean, Saudi Arabia, I wrote about this a couple of years ago, how they were, and it was reported in the foreign press, UK Telegraph and The Guardian, how they were, Saudi Arabia buying nukes from Pakistan and actually funding their nuclear program. And evidently they've been bragging, at least in some channels and some reports, they've been bragging about how they got nukes. Do you think we could have nuclear war as a result of all this economic chaos? In other words, Gerald Celente type moment where, when all else fails, they take you to war. Do you see that on the horizon?
Well, I don't know that I've ever seen a scenario that it brings us closer than what we're seeing right now in Syria. And you just mentioned Saudi Arabia with nukes. There was a very high-ranking member of the CIA who used to work for the CIA. He recently came out on Fox Business Channel and said, oh yeah, everyone knows Saudi Arabia already has nukes, but most Americans don't realize this. Of course, Russia is there in Syria, and they're one of the two great nuclear powers on the entire planet. And then many believe, myself, I believe that Iran actually already has nuclear weapons. So we see this convergence of military powers that either have or potentially have nuclear weapons there in Syria. But this is a very, very serious situation, and we kind of need to go back a little bit, Greg, to kind of explain to the people, what's going on. Because, well, right now, along the southern border of Turkey and in northern Saudi Arabia right now, Saudi Arabia has organized what is being called the biggest military exercise in the history of the Middle East. Now, initial reports out of Saudi Arabia indicated 350,000 soldiers from 20 different nations. Other reports say 150,000 soldiers. Whatever it is, whatever the true number is, it's massive. And they're massing there in northern Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, in southern Turkey, Turkey is massing forces along the border. Saudi Arabia sent military aircraft there to southern Turkey and special forces, the United Arab Emirates as well. And so, it looks like they're potentially poised for an invasion. Now, why are Saudi Arabia and Turkey so concerned about what's going on in Syria? Well, let's go back to 2011. At that time, we had seen the Arab Spring. We had seen dictators toppled, in several places in the Middle East. And so Saudi Arabia and Turkey and their allies got together with U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who kind of spearheaded this whole thing. And they said, you know what? Since all this other stuff is going on, why don't we take this as an opportunity to overthrow President Assad in Syria? And they thought, well, this will be great. We'll break up the Shiite crescent there that kind of stretches from Iran to Lebanon. And, we'll get rid of a close ally of Iran. And since Syria is 74% Sunni Muslim, anyway, well, we'll just overthrow the government. We'll have new elections. We'll set up a Sunni government that's friendly to Saudi Arabia and Turkey and bring them into the Sunni axis of power. This will be wonderful. So they started organized protests, and they got angrier, and then they started arming the protesters, and the fighting broke out, and we've seen this tremendously deadly civil war now over the past 5 years, which is now flooding Europe with refugees. It's a giant mess. It's a massive disaster. But at first, the plan that Saudi Arabia and Turkey had hatched with Hillary Clinton was working. The Sunni militants that they were backing and arming and funding, and they poured millions and millions and millions of dollars into these guys. They've armed them with incredible equipment, and they were taking territory from the Syrian regime. They took Aleppo, the biggest city and most important economic city there in all of Syria. And so it looked like Assad was in trouble, that he was going to fall. Well, then something happened. Assad said, hey, Iran, I need your help. Hezbollah, we need your help. Russia's sent in their air force. And now the tide of the war has completely turned around. Russian air power has been absolutely overwhelming. And so now the Sunni militants are on the run. And so Saudi Arabia and Turkey are in a panic because, you've got the Syrians backed by Iran and Hezbollah and Russian air power. As they're marching forward, they're about to cut off the remaining supply lines from Turkey to these Sunni militants. Meanwhile, the Kurds in the north are making progress. They're kind of doing their own thing. They're making progress along the northern border of Turkey, and Turkey doesn't like that at all because Turkey has problems with the Kurds in their own country. And so Saudi Arabia and Turkey are kind of looking at this, and they're saying the war is almost lost. And if they lose right now, it's a total disaster for them because in the end, Iran will have much more of a tight relationship with Syria than ever before, closer allies. Hezbollah will now have a tremendous presence, especially there in western Syria. The Russians are there more strongly than ever before. And so Turkey and Saudi Arabia are saying, well, if we give up now, the situation is going to be even worse than if we had never even tried to overthrow Assad. So Turkey and Saudi Arabia are saying, well, we either have to give up and cut our losses, or we've got to go in and do the job ourselves because the Sunni militants, including ISIS, are not getting the job done that they were supposed to get done. So Turkey and Saudi Arabia are very seriously considering a ground operation, a ground invasion of Syria. And they've openly talked about this. Now, of course, they're trying to enlist the United States to lead the way, because they know that if they go in, they could especially if they start heading toward Damascus, which is the goal to take out Assad, are the Russians and the Iranians and Hezbollah going to stand aside and let them do it? I would say almost certainly not. In fact, it could very easily erupt into World War III.
Well, Russia brought that brand new guided cruise missile carrier and put it in the Eastern Mediterranean. I think that pretty much backs up your claim that they're not going to step aside, and they'll probably nuke them. You think, and you think that this goes into that will be a sign that either way, we have a financial collapse and then we have war, or we have war and a financial collapse. Either way, we're going to get a financial collapse in war. Is that what your analysis shows?
Yeah, I believe that's precisely what we're heading for. Now, of course, the financial collapse is already in process. Economic activity is grinding to a halt all over the planet. But then if World War III erupts in the Middle East, then that just accelerates things greatly. And so, whatever, the chicken or the egg, which comes first, but without a doubt, we're moving into this kind of time that many have described as a perfect storm. And so I believe we're seeing that right in front of our eyes. Now, you just mentioned Russia. Russia, according to former Associated Press reporter Robert Perry, he says that a source has told him that the Russians have already warned Turkey that if they start heading toward Damascus, that Russia is prepared to use tactical nuclear weapons against any forces heading toward Damascus. And of course, Russia has more tactical nuclear weapons than anyone on the planet. And so that's a very, very serious thing. And so we could potentially, and not just see conflict there in Syria, but if Saudi Arabia goes in and then Iran or Russia starts hitting Saudi air bases in Saudi territory or Turkish air bases in Turkish territory, well, Turkey is a member of NATO. I mean, this thing could spread and just become a major regional war so easily. Let's hope that cooler heads prevail, Greg.
How do you like it gold? I've never talked to you about gold, but and I don't know if you write very much about it. But what are your thoughts about gold and the recent gold market? They've tried to crush it here recently, but boy, it sure is being resilient. You think it's because of all the things you just mentioned about the economic problems and the war problems and all that? How do you like gold?
Well, I've always told people that I love gold and silver, but people need to be ready for the roller coaster ride because there's going to be huge ups and huge downs, so people need to be able to handle that. Now, during times of financial crisis, like we saw in the aftermath of the last financial crisis, people tend to pour into precious metals to preserve their wealth during times of great crisis. And so we've already started to see gold start to move up. We've started to see silver start to move up a bit. And in particular, my wife and I just love silver because gold and silver are both undervalued. But when you look at the ratio of how they come out of the ground, some people say 9 to 1, 10 to 1, 12 to 1 in terms of the ratio of gold and silver. But in terms of their prices right now, gold is, the ratio is far, far higher than that. So at some point we think, yeah, gold's going to go up, but that ratio is going to get back to where it historically has been and should be. And so we think silver is just going to absolutely skyrocket in the years ahead. So, we like gold, Greg, but we absolutely love silver for the long term. Now, there's going to be huge ups and downs, and people need to be warned about that.
Michael Snyder, your blog, the Economic Collapse blog, you have some other blogs, too. Just quickly say where you can find those and what they are.
Yeah. The Economic Collapse blog, if you just go to Google and type in the Economic Collapse, it's the first result that comes up. I've got two other websites, endoftheamericandream.com. Same thing, just go to Google, type in End of the American Dream, it's the first result that comes up. Or themostimportantnews.com. Once again, go to Google, type in The Most Important News, it's the first result that comes up. So you can find my writing on all those sites, and you can find my books and DVDs there. And then look for I'm releasing a new book on Bible prophecy, which will be released sometime next month.
Oh, great. And we can go to the Economic Collapse blog. I mean, I'm going to drive everybody to the Economic. You can also get to all those sites through the Economic Collapse blog, correct?
Yeah. Yes,
I'm going to link to there, folks. So you guys watch it on YouTube, go up to the right through, and I'll put links to the Economic Collapse blog. And Michael Snyder, fantastic. People are going to love this. Thank you for coming on and giving us your views and analysis on what's going on with the economy and the prospects, the gloomy prospects. I don't mean to even smile on this one. You just did a great interview and explained it well. The gloomy prospects of global war, especially starting in the Middle East. Thank you, Michael Snyder, the Economic Collapse blog.
Thank you, Greg.